Cool. So I'll just say a few words and then I'll turn it over to Krysti, and we'll kind of go back and forth about our kind of history with apprenticeship, you know, what we're seeing in the landscape across the country right now, and kind of some forecasts. But yeah, to back up, Orrian Willis, once again, I've worked in workforce development for about 12 years here in San Francisco. I met Amanda through some of this work maybe 10 years ago when I was at the Mission Economic Development Agency, and we were working on a Slingshot grant through CWDB and then an Accelerator grant after that. So been friends with Amanda ever since then. And fast forward a few years, I came over to the city and county of San Francisco about 6 years ago, and was familiar with apprenticeship, you know, through the trades. But once I came on board here, Krysti and I inherited this American Apprenticeship Initiative grant that was all about piloting tech apprenticeships in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, which at the time did not necessarily have an appetite for hearing from us, let alone trying to connect any of their personal identifying information to the Department of Labor. So we'll go into all of that more in detail in a second. And we're really hoping that today is, you know, valuable to everybody in the room. We really want this to be more of a conversation. So please feel free to chime in, come off mute, put questions in the chat. We'll slow down every once in a while to kind of pause and say, like, does that make sense to you? Do you have any questions? Do you want to poke holes in some of our theories? So with that, I'll turn it over to Krysti, and then we'll kind of go through the deck.
Awesome. Thanks, Orrian. It's nice to be here with you all. I am Krysti Sprecht. I'm a director within the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, which is a center based out of Jobs for the Future, which is a national organization that is focused on education and workforce alignment, policy, implementation, all the things. We are everywhere and we do everything. Specific to my work, though, I'm really focused on tech apprenticeship and work-based learning, as well as in-school youth. So looking at pathways for individuals who are 16, 17, 18 years old to apprentice an occupation while they are in high school, earn a wage, and transition that work into college or into a career post high school. So we're working on piloting different ways of maneuvering that, and then also on teacher apprenticeship, which is a new kind of hot apprenticeship topic right now that's getting a lot of different attention, and it's still a pretty tough avenue to go down right now. It's still something we're all still really learning. And to Orrian's point, we really started this journey kind of together, and it's been so interesting. I come by way of the world of education and worked for federally funded TRIO programs for about 12 years. And was focused on college access and transitioned into workforce. And so I spent my whole career going, you need a college degree. And then I transitioned to TechSF and said, wait, you don't need a college degree. You can learn the skills on the job. And Orrian and I went out into the world with this H-1B grant, talking with tech employers about, hey, we have this H-1B grant, right? We have all these really great people who are ready to work, and we want them to come work for your company, and we'll put them through an apprenticeship. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating when we say people laughed, right? I wish I was. But really, we had to kind of go back and really test drive what we were trying to produce. We had to really think about how to not be workforce professionals, how to be looking like we could actually, looking like tech professionals. We had to figure out a way of blending government funded work and the government itself with the fastest moving sector, in the world, and potentially in the region, in the Bay Area as well. So we really had an uphill climb, but we were really agile, and we did everything we could to really push ourselves outside of our comfort zones, and try to also appear to have a really different product. And it did work. So with that, I'll kind of pass it back over to Orrian if you want to jump into this particular section.
Yeah, sure. So this is just more background on us and kind of how we got to where we're at today with all of our apprenticeship work. But it was, I mean, it's definitely been a wonderful learning experience. Krysti and I have kind of done this roadshow for the past few years now, and I think it's fun to share the lessons we've learned, but then also talk to other people in the field who maybe have some insights that we've never come across before as well. So, for those of you who responded to the poll saying that you're experts, please chime in. So along that journey, Krysti and I were fortunate enough to go to Switzerland, and there's this institute there called CEMITS, which is taught through the ETH University in Zurich, which is essentially Switzerland's version of MIT. And at that institute, they have a team of like chief economists that are working on improving Switzerland's apprenticeship programs. And then they also workshop apprenticeship systems from around the world. So you can come there from Serbia, or you can come there from Benin, Africa, or you can come there from Micronesia and say, hey, this is our apprenticeship system or approach or our kind of vision, and they'll let you know where the gaps are and how to kind of create a path towards developing a truly countrywide system of apprenticeship. Long story short, Krysti and I were there for about 12 days. It was a total crash course in what is the gold standard of apprenticeship, and came back just incredibly inspired. And you just can't unsee that. When you see a country that has 70-80% of its citizens are in the middle class, and that's because of apprenticeship, it really makes you look at our own economy through a different lens. And while it's been a really uphill and challenging journey to get buy-in in tech, it's all worth it. And I think a lot of the lessons that we've kind of gained through working around tech-enabled companies apply to any type of company, right? It's just tech is particularly risk averse, and but you could look at any industry that is not the trades really and say, hey, there's probably an opportunity to embed apprenticeship in your pathways. But again, it's going to take a lot of work. It took Switzerland 30 years. And so that is information we came back with and said, we're committed. I've got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And my joke is, if by the time they're graduating high school, they have options around multiple different apprenticeship pathways, then we've done a good job. And so I've got 11 years. Is there anything else on this slide you want to add, Krysti? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what you're hitting on is kind of this twofold thing that we're learning about, looking at the US and then looking at these other countries. And I mean, Orrian and I can talk about tech all day long, right? And at the end of the day, tech and employers, they're employers, right? So we're using a really unique subsect of employers to walk through like how we appealed to a certain sector and all those pieces. But when we went to Switzerland, what we really learned was that it is not a fragmented part of the workforce system. Apprenticeship is woven into the fabric. Education is woven into the fabric. When you are 16, you make a decision. Do you want to go through a traditional four-year college? Do you want to go through a four-year college with some apprenticeship? Do you want to go through apprenticeship? And you can change your mind as you go through this system and bounce and weave. By the time you are done with either a degree in apprenticeship, or an apprenticeship program, you have a career waiting for you, and you've probably earned a wage. And these are 19-year-olds that are, held accountable and responsible, and they're put up into opportunities to thrive and shine. And so we saw this all play out. And what it really did was kind of, one, it really humbled us to the work that we're doing in the US, because in the US right now, it's very, very fragmented, right? It's trying to take pieces of apprenticeship and kind of, oh, let's talk about apprenticeship and let's talk about how it fits here, right? And we're trying to kind of force it to fit in certain places. But how it works in some of these other countries is that it is just the fabric of what you do. And it's a decision you make. And if you leave the system, you can come back and re-enter the system up until like the age of 55 or something like that. So, we could make a decision, in your 30s, say, hey, I want to go back and go into a different career. And you can re-enter the system, the education apprenticeship, they call it vocational education training system, and jump back into that and retrain. And so what we've really tried to do, as Orrian and I have moved forward, is take what we've learned about the sector approach with tech, right? How to talk to business, how to talk to companies, to really channel what we've learned from the students in the schools, from students who are going through like community-based education, who may not have a degree or a high school diploma for that matter, for taking what we're learning about the appetite in the US and taking what we've learned in Switzerland and what we're trying to do in a very move the Titanic kind of way, right? Like, how do we move a steamship is trying to put all those pieces together. And so what we've done is really kind of build out different models and different examples in different companies and looked at different models across the US and are trying to really make sure that young people and adults at any point in time can kind of go back, enter an apprenticeship system, that apprenticeship is a nurturing system for them to also receive some type of additional education if possible, right? If they can get a degree out of it, we're not mad at that, right? If they can get other training or credentialing or certificates, then that's great too. So we're kind of trying to tackle it as a apprenticeship as a solution for maybe business, but also apprenticeship as a solution for making sure that people have access to opportunity in a way that they haven't in the past, right? So we're really kind of looking at this in a layered way. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I think, it's one of the things that we learned on that trip is that in America, we spend 180 times more money on supporting people to and through college than we do on workforce development. But only 1 in 4 Americans will graduate college. And that college credential is, that's the barometer for aptitude that we use in this country in a lot of kind of new collar roles. In Switzerland and Germany and these other countries where they've been doing skills-based hiring for a long time. So to Krysti's point, when you're moving through an apprenticeship pathway and you're kind of chipping away at these different competencies, those transcend the rest of the labor market. So you can kind of hop over, you have transferable skills, right? They call it permeability, which is something that doesn't really exist in America because we really only have a few different types of credentials in each industry that we recognize. And all of that's to say that the people in this room who are workforce development practitioners and professionals, I think our roles are going to become so much more important over the years because I think our policymakers are finally understanding that the college for all kind of ethos is not working for Americans, right? And so the average age of a apprentice in California is 31 years old, whereas in Switzerland it's 17. And so we have serious gaps in terms of where people are able to access, competent training that leads to strong employment outcomes. And I think as a result, we're going to see more investments over the next few years. You're already starting to see it in a lot of stuff like the Inflation Reduction Act that is calling out apprenticeship as a key strategy to develop America's middle class again. So anyway, there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about in all this. Let's go to the next slide, which is kind of a pause to see if anybody has some questions. There might be some stuff in the chat.
Not yet. Yeah, feel free to keep adding questions in the chat or come off mute if you would like.
I have a question. Hi, Orrian. This is Nadeja. I think, so I know when mentioning apprenticeship to many people in the industry, there's been like a large acceptance around like construction trades, healthcare. Why do you think there's so much resistance from the tech industry in comparison to these other industries that are more so leading the space with apprenticeship trades?
Sorry, so why is it just more easily, why is it more prominent in the trades?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just, it's interesting. I think the trades they invented a lot of these systems. Like I think the National Apprenticeship Act, from 75 years ago or whatever, was designed by folks from the building, construction and building trade sector. And it works really well when you have unions involved, right? So when there's collective bargaining that really is there to fight for workers' rights and wage scales, all sorts of benefits and credentials, like all of those things make a lot of sense when you have a really strong worker voice. Whereas in a lot of other industries that do not participate in collective bargaining, I think it's, HR teams push back, right? I mean, it's like, it's not always, the short-term threats kind of outweigh the long-term gains when you're talking to like an HR person in tech, right? They're looking at next quarter, 2 quarters out, maybe a year out, as opposed to maybe we're going to have to make some investments now and take some hits, but we're going to grow the available labor market, which in the long run supports all of us as an industry. But it's just really short-sightedness, honestly. But in the trades, where you have unions, it makes perfect sense. And so I think all of these other industries and companies that have union representation, that's kind of low-hanging fruit, right? To kind of go in there. And we're trying to do that here in the city of San Francisco with this IT position internally to turn that into a registered apprenticeship. I think we just got the green light to start recruiting in September. So that's taken just 6 years, to convince ourselves to do it. So thanks for that question. And I should just plug that Deja, this is your 7th day on our team at TechSF. Welcome. We're really lucky to have you. Deja is new to TechSF, but not so new to apprenticeship and definitely not new to workforce development. So thanks for joining. Anything you want to add, Krysti?
I think that apprenticeship is the core and fabric of the trades, right? It is standardizing how someone gets from point A to point B for safety reasons, for quality control reasons, right? You want the person building a skyscraper to have a great education that's been vetted by individuals, right? And what's interesting is that as we talk to different employers from across different, sectors across the country, you have a very, very, you never know what you're going to get, right? You never know if someone is going to say, I get it, I understand the value, or if they're going to say, no, I don't want to promise jobs, right? I don't want to promise a job to someone. And a lot of it, to be honest, is really just kind of, I feel like personally, it's kind of an American way of thinking, to be honest. It's a little bit, it's apprenticeship is playing the long game. You are playing the long game for somebody's life and their career development. And in certain sectors and in the US, we are often looking quarter by quarter. Not to say that you don't look quarter by quarter in other countries, but something that's very interesting is that in other countries, there is the understanding that you develop and you train the talent that will come to your company, right? So they see education and workforce as the same thing. They see it that if you are going to apprentice at their company, you are getting an education in workforce, right? In the job that you're learning, and the skills, the practical skills, the theoretical skills, all of those are going to roll into one bucket of learning that you will practice on the job. And so when you go visit certain companies, like, I don't remember the name of one of the companies we visited because I believe it was something in Swiss and I don't remember. And it was a heavy tech company in Zurich. And there was a 19-year-old in there who had already apprenticed, I want to say, multiple occupations or one occupation at the very least. He was a software engineer, and there was no question in their mind, right? Like, we just trained this person up. He's sticking around. He's a vital force to our workforce. What is there to question, right? So there's a lot of that where it's really baked into the institutional fabric of certain countries. And in the US, we are still not there yet. We haven't changed the minds of people quite yet around how apprenticeship really is blending education and practical on the job, hands-on training into one fruitful workforce development strategy. And we haven't been able to do that yet in the US. And that's something that we're, trying to conquer. Any other questions or?
Yeah, you just kind of answered half of it, which is, I was going to ask, it doesn't include like programming or software engineering, which you just mentioned. But I was wondering, how does like apprenticeship in that sector compare to like something that's been pretty popular for like the last decade, which is like boot camps, for people to switch over to the that sort of tech industry? Is that something you compete with, or is that something that you kind of incorporate into marketing apprenticeships for this type of job?
That's a great question. And we can actually speak to how we've actually infused boot camp or boot camp type training into an apprenticeship program. And actually, maybe this is a good transition to the next slide even, because I think we can walk through what is in an apprenticeship program really briefly. And I'll come back to the question of the audience after, I'm going to go a little rogue here. But so to that question, an apprenticeship really encompasses, right, paid on the job learning. So you are doing work in the workplace, you're receiving a paycheck, you are practicing the skills you're learning. You're also receiving either classroom or virtual, or I like to call it off the job learning, to be honest, like, just to keep it quippy here, or just online instruction. And so that boot camp concept that you just mentioned actually could be part of that classroom training or online instruction, right? You can incorporate that in. That's that off the job learning. But all those skills you're learning in a boot camp, of course, would come back to support you on the job. With those two concepts woven together, then you really do create kind of, that journey worker level status individual, but really the skill set that's needed to be a full-time employee operating in a place of work. I also like to weave in mentorship into this. This is something that, with TechSF and any of the programs that I work on at JFF, that we require that there is mentorship baked into this. Because as all of us know on this call, when you sit alone in a workplace, it is hard. Like if you start a new job and your boss is like, okay, bye, see you around. You know what I mean? It's like there's a certain level of human connection and interaction that's needed. And for individuals who are apprentices, you are not coming on board with 100% of the competencies needed to be a mastered employee in that role. So for a software engineer, for example, right? Hypothetically, an individual that's an apprentice is going to show up with less of the competencies, but many foundational skills, right? They're going to understand how to use a computer. They may be able to write their own code. They may be able to read certain, like languages. It's going to be different where someone comes in. By the time they exit the apprenticeship, after hours and hours of on-the-job training, off-the-job training, they will be an expert. And within tech occupations, we normally see, but they can range, the minimum is 12 months for an apprenticeship. That's really what the Department of Labor wants to see, but there are others that are longer. It depends on how the company structures it. So you can kind of see different variations of it playing out in the industry. Orrian, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just no, it's perfect, but just the Fran Kennedy quote, which is, people look at pathways to careers either in it's vocational or it's education, and she's like, it's not a either or, it's a both and, right? So apprenticeship is when you're you're doing applied learning as well as theoretical learning, all within one framework that takes maybe a year, maybe 2 years. But when you see people move through these programs and they have 90-something% completion rates across every occupation that you apprentice, you realize that it's probably the most effective way to train people, right? I think someone who just completed a CS degree, but does not have a lot of work experience is not going to be very productive day one, right? So in Switzerland, they call that that kind of phase of when you hire someone and they're asking their mentor and their manager a lot of questions and they're not super productive. They call that the disruption footprint, right? And everyone has a disruption footprint, whether you have a master's degree or just a high school diploma. And so to Krysti's point of like going back to why it's important for industry to consider themselves a part of that educational journey for all citizens, it's critical. Without that, we're not going to meet the skills demands that we currently have in the country and that we're forecasted to have. We need to create more ways to incentivize employers to participate in education, and we think apprenticeship is the easiest way for them to do that.
Orrian, there's a comment in the chat. Well, me and Shauna, of course, have been commenting. Carrie says, how do you establish industry vetting? What suggestions do you have regarding employer partnerships in creating an apprenticeship program?
Yeah, this is probably the hardest part. Yeah, glad Orrian's nodding. I mean, it's really like fun as workforce. I'll call myself, and and I feel confident I can call Orrian a workforce geek a bit, right? We're both like workforce nerds, proud to be it, right? And it's really easy for us to kind of sit back and design like what we think would be really, really fantastic and put together some really beautiful like Department of Labor standards and like do all the things. And then the second you take it to an employer, they could be like, what is this? I don't want to see this document, right? This is like government jargon. I don't want to read it. I want to understand this a little bit differently, or this is not the right fit or any of that. And so I think when I think about industry vetting, I think, and how to build out partnerships, I will say we tried we try. And I'm going to say that ongoingly because I mean, I still have conversations with companies where you're trying different angles on how to get that employer to understand the benefits of apprenticeship. But we have tried many, many different angles. We have tried the angle of bringing city leadership in to talk about it. We have brought the angle of other employers to talk about it. We've brought the angle of bringing national leaders in apprenticeship, of international leaders in apprenticeship, of bringing employers together to talk to each other about it because they want to hear the business case, right? We've sat on the purview and listened to employer councils like talk amongst themselves. We've pitched it boldly. There is no one size fits all approach to it. But what I will say is that to have your program be successful, you can't compromise the program. And that's a really, really hard balance to find, especially in tech. There are other industries where that might not be as difficult. Like I think of like, as I work on teacher apprenticeship right now, there's no school that's like, oh, we don't need them to understand classroom management, right? Like that's not happening. But when it comes to other like sectors, or specifically like when I think about our experience with tech, I do think about that there are we did have experience with employers that would say, like, oh, what if we just shorten it? Like, we don't want it to be 9 months. We just want them to get it fast and done. Okay, well, that might not be how everyone's going to learn. That also is going to compromise the integrity of their learning, of the curriculum, and it's going to put an unnecessary pressure on students in a way that we do not feel is going to be, beneficial to their learning. So I think what we really had to learn, I think over and over again, to be honest, I don't think we ever stop learning this, is that you have to hold true to the tenets and the basic principles of your program. So if you are saying, I see best practices are X, I'm having learners who come in with X skills and they need to get to Y. How do I get them to that? Employers with employer vetting, there are going to be employers that show up and they want to take the quick, easy fix. And those aren't your employers for apprenticeship right away. And what I would recommend is that you find other ways of, which great segue to the work-based learning continuum, you find other ways of baking in work-based learning opportunities to keep that employer invested and involved, and that you work on them long game for apprenticeship, but that you're always able to point to the successful and like, thoughtful apprenticeship programs in like companies within their sector. So that is something that we used to do often at TechSF, was say, hey, company X over here, let me show you what their program looks like and why it's so valuable. And then that would make them think about it a little bit more. But not every company is going to get to apprenticeship. Some are going to stop at a different level on the work-based learning continuum of what they're willing to provide. And that's okay. You don't want to force, right, a square peg in a round hole. Orrian, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, that was awesome. I mean, you're right. It's just totally relational. Like, it's not a quick fix, and employers really have to be willing to roll up their sleeves and, vet a lot of legal jargon from the Department of Labor, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards in California, and have it all approved by their legal teams and HR and hiring managers. It's a journey, just like getting one employer to commit to hiring one apprentice. But the results are really strong for both the employers and for those workers. So we keep pushing it. I think one of the things that we had to do was really stop being too salesy and really kind of turn into more of a business service, where we would highlight some of the successful programs that we had established and then let that kind of good news circulate and then have employers come back to us. And so kind of two things have happened. So one of them is we started the Northern California Apprentice Network about 18 months ago. And that is a forum where we just allow employers to pitch to each other why they do apprenticeship. And again, it removes us from being the salespeople, which was not super effective. And as a result, we now have this kind of wider audience of employers that are aware of some of our services. And what we've realized is that it's the small and medium-sized enterprises that you're going to have probably more success in adoption with. Like, the conversations move a lot quicker. They have more of a talent pinch around, competing with the big Googles of the world. A lot of small and medium-sized enterprises are owned by women or people of color, and I feel like those groups are more open to the kind of non-traditional career pathway job seeker, and they deserve our attention. I think a lot of intermediaries in the apprenticeship world are so focused on Fortune 500 companies that they leave those small businesses out of it. And the Fortune 500 companies don't really need us to increase their bottom line. They're doing fine. It's the small mom and pop shops that that I recommend engaging first to pilot this stuff, because you're going to have quicker wins, and it means a lot more to those companies. And then this slide, to Krysti's point, is the work-based learning continuum created by Jobs for the Future. And it really makes a lot of sense. So it's just the different types of buckets of work-based learning. Some are high touch, some are low touch, some are geared towards supporting someone through an educational pathway. Some are a lot more about preparing someone to start working. I don't know, Krysti, if you want to go into this one at all, but as you can see at the top of it, with career experience being the highest level of work-based learning, you see registered apprenticeships in there as the top, because registered apprentices you're an employee at that point, right? So you're no longer doing a job shadow or a summer internship or externship. You are working at the company. And like Krysti said earlier, most apprenticeships are designed to be about a year long, at least in tech. So you can think of it as like a year-long interview, right? Like, at the end of that year, the idea is that they remove the apprenticeship label from your title, and they just make you a software engineer, or they just make you a data analyst or something like that.
Yeah, and I think adding to that as well, so with this continuum, the value this continuum brings is that, of course, which, unfortunately, the continuum was too long for me to fit onto the slide. So I kind of cut the bottom half off, which is really the career exploration point, right? So, the concept of a career exploration is really just attending something that's very low risk, right? You're learning more about an occupation. As you climb up the work-based learning continuum, that is fully investing. So once you get to the top, the apprenticeship, the jobs, on the job training, that's a paid working experience. The reason why this continuum is valuable is because what we did learn also when we were trying to deploy apprenticeships at TechSF, and this is something that I can't do as much in my current work, but we still advertise, is that the continuum these are still valuable opportunities, right? Not every opportunity is going to lead to an apprenticeship. However, if you do have valuable employers in your network and an apprenticeship is your end goal, well, you don't have to just go from 0 to 100, right? You can talk about other work-based learning opportunities that can be provided to your clients or your learners where there's still valuable information gained, experiences had, and you can find a way of really nurturing that relationship. And from our experience in doing that, we were able to nurture relationships where employers would kind of circle back and go, yeah, you know what, I do want to talk about apprenticeship. And what it would also do is introduce your learners to the employees at that company. So if we were holding we called them TechSF days, but it really was a day where we would design with the employer to bring TechSF learners to a workplace. So for Twitter, for example, you might bring folks in. They might be sitting having one-on-one conversations with the employees of Twitter, making relationships, talking about the skills needed to go into the job. They may be doing a workplace tour. They may be doing other things as well. But those opportunities in themselves introduce the caliber of candidate that you have to the employer, and it keeps the employer close, right? So you're continuing planning with that employer, they know you have that relationship built. So I think it's just really good to think about the whole continuum in itself as a value add, and that apprenticeship, of course, is a great end result. You want that end result if that's the goal, but that there are other really great goals that can be valuable for your learners.
We're back to the question slide.
I had a question earlier about like just competencies and how somebody, say, goes through an apprenticeship differs from somebody who did like a computer science degree or software engineering degree.
Like what the differences are?
Yeah, just in terms of competencies, because I suspect that math and science is different, and the amount of mathematics is a huge gatekeeper for many occupations. So I was just curious if you could speak to like the differentiation, because that's often the rationale why companies want to hire people with bachelor's degrees or more, is they have this breadth of skills that then if say languages change, they can pivot with it,
Yeah, so I'm going to take a stab at this and then Orrian, go for it. So our friend and colleague Kevin Berry would say that math, that's a misconception around the math that's needed, and that it's really around like writing code is not necessarily require a deep calculus knowledge base or a 4-year degree level of math. Or even algebra per se. There's a certain level of logic and memorization and kind of next step planning that goes into this. But to your point, it's a great call out, right? Is that right now in the US, the only kind of like caliber we have for like who's career ready is a 4-year degree. And that's not even accurate, right? Like, I mean, I have 2 4-year degrees and I wasn't ready. And I wasn't maybe ready for one of those careers post-college, just because we have that degree doesn't necessarily demonstrate that I'm ready for a career in X. We've also heard employers say that a college degree in CS, so computer, or CS, or even just engineering in general, that's the perfect person to put into an apprenticeship program, which is really really hard to listen to, right? Because then what do you do with everyone else? And so there's kind of a mixed bag of responses to that. But through an apprenticeship program that can be designed to get you into being fully competent as a software engineer, those programs might be a little bit longer or a little bit more intense or not. There are some that are like 9 months long. There are some that are longer than that. But what they're going to do is actually be activated around what the company needs specifically. So you're not looking at like the canon of work or the canon of information that like a normal degree program would pump out, right? You're looking at, if I work for company X, this is the skill set I need to bring to the table. And it's a little bit more narrow. And the employer is able to build their apprenticeship program around that very narrow skill set that they expect you to have. And so that's one of the benefits to doing it through an apprenticeship program, is that for the employer, for one, you're getting a really great, like your candidate, your apprentice is being nurtured into your company. They're going to understand your language. They're going to understand your, technology back and forth. And that you're really streamlining everything you expect them to understand and to activate on the job, which is super important as well. So it takes kind of the fringe of the degree out, right? You have a lot of other things you learn in your degree program that may not come into play at the job, but the apprenticeship program keeps it streamlined. So it's only focused on everything that they need you to do for on the job. Orrian, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know like the technical requirements of a software engineer. I work at TechSF, but I'm not actually that excited about tech in general. I just appreciate how much money it pays our job seekers when they graduate and get jobs in tech. So I'm glad, Krysti, you know more about like the math requirements and stuff like that, because I definitely don't. But the data shows that completers of registered apprenticeship programs, and specifically in software engineering paths, actually have stronger retention, numbers than university recruiting hires do. And we've kind of analyzed that with some of our employer partners. And so, yeah, again, like I don't know what that means around like those core math skills and how that prepares someone for a future down the line in engineering, but our employer partners are saying we're getting a better return on investment through apprenticeship than we are through university recruiting. And the point of developing a strong apprenticeship program is you want the completer to have a value in the labor market that is equivalent to a college degree holder. Like that is the goal, right? I think as people are completing apprenticeships and getting those credentials from the Department of Labor, especially in tech, I think the industry is like, well, what does that really mean? But if somebody can demonstrate through a technical interview that they are just as strong as the next candidate, then that's all that really matters, right? Like in tech, degrees are important, but you have to show that you can apply the skills that you've either learned through an apprenticeship or on the job or through education before you get hired. And or you have to know somebody, right? I think social capital is kind of like the big elephant in the room in tech, and apprenticeship kind of removes that barrier, right? So it gives you experience, it gives you social capital, and it requires education, and it comes with a credential. So yeah, I guess just time will tell. Software engineering apprenticeships are still really, really new, but we'll see in 5 to 10 years like what the results are. But I'm a firm believer that apprentice completers will be doing just fine.
And Orrian, there's a question in the chat that I think you might be more well posed to answer, and that's around being open to apprenticeships with firefighting and expecting or anticipating maybe some union pushback. And wondering if you're seeing anything in San Francisco or in the state right now, but also even how you've maneuvered the union work that you've been doing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't have a great answer. I mean, I can tell you that in California, the second highest percentage of apprentices are in the firefighters union. So I can tell you that there are certain unions out there that represent firefighters who are really open to apprenticeship. So it'd be probably most advantageous to talk to those programs and figure out how they got buy-in and support from the unions. I think the way that we were able to get the green light here in San Francisco from the union was, basically saying, these are your future members, your dues paying members. Union participation and strength is not increasing as of lately. And this is a way for you to really grow your membership. And on top of that, we're going to kind of meet you in the middle by investing in their pre-apprenticeship training as well as the training that they go through on the job. I do see Jed, who just came on camera, who's are you able to talk all about the firefighter stuff?
Well, you're jumping right to the nitty gritty, huh? I thought we can't ease into the conversation. with
No,
the
not
easier
at all. We're just
stuff?
going to
No?
toss you into the deep end, Jed.
Wow. Yeah, no, good to see you, Aaron. It's really difficult. Not that they are difficult. It's just, things are territorial. There's some issues. We're doing a paramedic apprenticeship where we got a grant from the DAS, the state expansion equity initiative. And so we're currently getting registered with DAS as well as DOL for our paramedic program. So we had to get approval, tacit approval from the firefighters union to even want to pursue that angle. It's not like a formal thing, like they didn't need to give us the green light, but I certainly didn't feel comfortable wasting anyone's time pursuing it until we had the green light from the firefighters union. And so there's issues between ambulance companies and firefighters. There's issues between different firefighters unions. So here in Contra Costa, there's what's called ConFire, right, which is our local fire department, and that is different from the bigger firefighters union. So there's more than one. There's more than one firefighters union, and so if you're doing an apprenticeship, you definitely want to check with both, and definitely want to use somebody that has some clout and knows those people. And it gets very political very fast. It was way above my pay grade, and I stay out of it. Was lucky enough to benefit from it. So I wish I had better answers.
No, but maybe you could put your email in the chat, because I think you definitely have a lot of insights and you've been successful in getting buy-in. I mean, that's how I heard your name.
But I did not get. Yeah, no, Bob Redlow, my guru, my mentor over here in Contra Costa, who's big in the health industry here, helped me navigate that method. I definitely just didn't call the firefighters, hey, I'm Jed and I'm looking for your approval. Like, what's up? I mean, nah, that definitely didn't happen. I'm happy to leave my my contact information. Appreciate it, guys.
No, thank you, Jed. Yeah, it's getting union support is it's very political. And I think we could talk a little bit more about just public sector apprenticeships, maybe at another call. But one really compelling argument that we came up with was, we're investing a lot of the city's general fund, or we're investing a lot of WIOA dollars in training up job seekers for private sector employers. While we have internal skills gaps, we are having a hard time attracting talent, especially tech talent in Silicon Valley. Nobody wants to work for the government. And so what better way to kind of recoup some of our own investments than by hiring folks that we've already paid to skill up, right? And so that I think was one argument that's helped, but happy to chat with you offline a little bit more about the union stuff. We talked about some of this stuff, already. We can kind of, gloss over this, but again, apprenticeship outside of the construction and building sector, there's just a lot of apprehension. And so I think particularly in tech, that kind of apprehension is a little more intense. And so that's what we dealt with. And I think that kind of gave us, thick skin. And because we've had some success around tech, we really do believe that it's possible anywhere. And so we kind of listed out some of the challenges, you know, specific to tech in launching apprenticeships. But again, this can kind of transcend any industry.
And I think something that is listed in this that I think is, to Orrian's point, it's going to transcend industry regardless, is thinking about that return on investment, on retention, on the costs associated with turnover, recruiting, all of that, right? When we're looking at the way the world has kind of shape-shifted with the world of work, you had, you know, the Great Resignation, and now you have people kind of sitting in their jobs, and you have these waves and ebbs and flows of industries changing, of how we work changing, and industry is not able to keep up regardless of the sector, right? The healthcare industry is struggling to get talent, government struggling to get talent. Everyone that you talk to is going to say in some way, shape, or form, right? They need more people. And so I think with apprenticeship, something that is hard to capture, but technically you can capture, but it's difficult, is thinking about the costs that are associated with that a company loses for recruiting costs, right? How much money are they losing trying to get new talent? How much money are they losing when they lose their purging staff, right? Or their staff are jumping ship to other offers. And then also, what is that return on investment when you bring in an apprentice? One of the things about bringing on an apprentice is that because an individual is coming in with hypothetically lower competencies than when they finish their apprenticeship, it's okay to bring them in at a lower wage, and then they increase their wage as they gain competencies. It's part of the model that's encouraged. So hypothetically, a company is actually almost saving a little bit of money out the gate with salary costs, but you may have different costs affiliated with it. So you may have to bring in or have a little bit of money going towards a mentor, right? Who's the person in the company that's helping the apprentice or apprentices feel connected, stay afloat, answering questions, right? It might just be a reallocation of how you're actually spending your money. And so that's something that, you know, we've tried to kind of demonstrate, the Department of Labor's tried to demonstrate, but there's not a lot of data right now across sectors, specifically individualized sectors. There are some companies that have figured out how to capture this. There are some calculations that can be used, but that's kind of an area right now in the world of apprenticeship that's a little bit muddy. And not because it has to be necessarily, because I think that sector by sector and company by, right, you have so many different variables that come in that affect it, that makes it a little bit hard to calculate. But at the same time, when you look at the entire apprenticeship system as a whole, that return on investment is around $1.47, pointing at Orrian, 41, 47-ish per apprentice, right? Your return on investment is almost $1.50 back. Like you're gaining money off of this person essentially, and you're keeping the person for a longer runway of time. So, you know, it's something that I think that the Department of Labor, the state of California, individual intermediaries, we all need to do a better job at portraying this, but it's something that businesses ask for and they want to better understand. And so I think if you're going in thinking about apprenticeship, it's something to consider, right? Like, are they going to actually, is there a gain, a financial gain to this? And I mean, I don't like thinking about it like that, but it's the truth, right? Like, it's what businesses want to see. Is there a financial gain to doing this beyond the human element to this, bringing on an apprentice, of course? Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat from Ashley. California community colleges, CSUs, and UCs received large grants to help supplement the cost of an intern or apprentice wages using the Learning Aligned Employment Program grant. I can pay 50% of an intern's or apprentice's wages at the for-profit level and 90% at the nonprofit.
Yeah, so the LEAP initiative is a newer initiative. I believe it went live in August of last year, ? I think it had a pretty fast runway on it and went live. I'm super curious if anyone has any kind of like data on how that's been going. I was on the committee that was getting the LEAP initiative off the ground, and was really curious to know how they were going to be able to kind of incentivize employers outside of just the wages. Wages are great. In tech, we've had interesting experience with like subsidization, basically, where some companies are like, we don't want to even deal with that. We just don't. It's more of a nightmare to deal with it. And other companies are like, we absolutely will take it. So I'm really curious to that information, if there's been some kind of like lessons learned or struggles or strategies or anything there, because that was a really fast piece of legislation moved, and a big chunk of money could have a lot of impact. So Ashley, if you have any intel, I mean, you can feel free to email me or message me separately. I'm super curious to know how that's been going.
I can definitely send you an email, Krysti. It's been interesting seeing it get off of the ground. When students are placed on campus, we can pay 100% of the wages. So I think a lot of these educational institutions are like, oh, we're just going to use this to pay students for on-campus jobs. And that's not what the grant was for. And so on our campus, for our college, we've really said, hey, these funds are specific for apprentices. And so we're working on agreements to do like an LVN to RN apprenticeship. And then also within advanced manufacturing, and those wages, or though that grant will help offset those costs. And then I have another grant, the California Apprenticeship Initiative grant, which will help cover the cost of apprentices, tuition, books, gears, all of that. So right now, like my LVN to RNs, it's a 10% cost for hospitals to put them through an apprenticeship program with us. So
that's great. I put my email in the chat. We should definitely chat. I'm super curious because, to your point, right, the information that came out from the LEAP program was really wide open, right? Schools could kind of do what they wanted to do with it, which is really kind of could be scary, could also be exciting, right? Depends on the college and depends on what they want to do with it. But there haven't been any like elevated best practices. So I'm really curious. Please feel free to shoot me an email. We can set up a time to chat.
I definitely will. I can tell you the majority of colleges have not got very far with this. I was asking questions like, hey, what are you guys doing about XYZ? And no, it was like crickets. I'm like, okay, so I'll figure out my own internal process then so I can move forward.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely a kind of contentious item in the apprenticeship world, the idea of incentivizing, especially paying wages, right? Like, so the last thing that you want to do is apprentice somebody where there's no job kind of guaranteed at the end of it, right? So you kind of always want to vet those partners by saying, you know, do you have the head count, you know, to keep them on board hypothetically when it's over? That being said, work experience is work experience, right? And so if somebody can kind of get a year under you through a CAI grant and then parlay that over into interviewing at another company, I think that's worthwhile. And then the other tricky thing is that there have been so many different grants over the years that include different incentive amounts and types of incentives. And so right when you get a group of employers excited about partnering, the grant goes away. And so I think the Apprenticeship Innovation Fund right now in California, which is the first formula funds for apprenticeship in the States, is really promising if we can get it right, because I think that's a barrier when you tell employers like, yeah, we can partner with you for 2 years, and then there's no guarantees that we'll have anything. They don't really want to, you know, meet you in the middle.
I agree. I know with LAPE grants, I can tell you our college, it's a 9-year grant and we got $4 million. And so that's just us. Like there was $500 million on the table, and 97% of your community colleges, CSUs and UCs got those funds. They applied and got them. So I think it's public knowledge, like who got what money. I just don't think employers realize it. And like I said, a lot of colleges aren't even off the ground with those programs yet, but over the next couple of years, they will have to be. They have to be able to show that they've spent some of this money, or they've got to give it back.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's like another example of like, you know, we just don't have the infrastructure in place to support like full on apprenticeship expansion, you know, to meet the governor's goals or all of these, you know, very ambitious goals. But a part of it is that we just need more people to really kind of do the research, kind of understand the model, see where it fits, have some experience, and then really become true believers in it. Because I think it goes back to the end user, who's the worker, and our public education systems are kind of failing most Americans, right? And this is a tried and true way of promoting millions of people into the middle class, right? And so this slide here, I know we got to wrap up in a second, is Krysti developed this, but this is active apprentices in the United States. So as you can see, the lion's share goes to construction, and then public administration, that's promising. And then it's all of these other kind of non-traditional sectors where that's where we have the most opportunity. And you'll see at the very bottom is tech, right? So 1,800 active tech apprentices, and that's not even just tech, that's like more than tech, but it just shows you that we're at the tip of the iceberg. If you consider that we have something like 1 million cybersecurity jobs that need to be filled in the next few years, there's just a lot of opportunity there, and college enrollment is going down. People are not seeing as much of the promise there. So to pay people to get, college level education while on the job training, which is what we do in apprenticeships, it's just the best of both worlds.
Just wanted this slide to just demonstrate that, like, we're moving in another direction, right? And I also know there's a fair amount of companies that don't register their programs, and so their data isn't even in here, which drives me bananas, because it'd be really cool to include that data, but it's not here. So, that's something to consider as well, that there are, of course, programs. Also, I don't know what this not provided category is that the Department of Labor collects. That feels like just a big DOL hiccup, if I have to be honest, because I don't understand how you couldn't know what sector that's in, or if they just couldn't figure out where to kind of bundle it. So that's also another area where I feel like there's probably more innovative apprenticeships in that bundle, but we just aren't aware of what that data set is.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is just about the new and emerging kind of sector stuff is recently a big grant came to the Bay Area for the SEMI Foundation, and it's to do microchip and semiconductor manufacturing, and their key strategy is apprenticeship. And so just a lot of this whole emphasis on reshoring jobs to the States. I think there's going to be more opportunities in the green sector, and as we're kind of bringing more offshore wind and solars and the this and the that, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then just, we'll see how AI impacts all of this stuff. In San Francisco, we're working with a few autonomous vehicle companies, and we're floating this idea of EV maintenance tech apprenticeships, which we could offer to people who are going to get, they're going to lose their jobs because they're currently, doing rideshare, and that's not going to exist here in 10 years. So trying to get ahead of that with apprenticeship as well.
I think that's all the slides, and that's all the slides that we had. Oh, no, it's not. I'm just kidding. The resource page. So put together a couple of resources from Department of Labor as well as JFF. One I want to point to that's really, really good is our apprenticeship training courses. So we have a series of free training courses where you can actually learn how to go in and build a standards. You can learn how to incorporate, equal opportunity into your standards, infuse DEIA into your standards, also just understanding the basis of apprenticeship and how to put all that together, sponsorship, etc. So if apprenticeship is a space where you're like, I'm trying to learn, but I really don't understand the background, logistics, the paperwork logistics, that's a really great link, and there's plenty of free courses for you to utilize there, as well as the DEIA apprenticeship framework, which our team that is in a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor put together, launched it recently, and that is what for JFF is something that we are infusing this framework into every apprenticeship program we kind of execute moving forward. So yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of the resources as well.